There are fields of brand new electric cars sitting in Canada right now, and almost nobody is buying them. Row after row of them, parked on dealer lots and overflow yards, thin snow gathering on windshields that have never been cleared by an owner. Cars that were built for a future everyone was told was inevitable, sitting still, in the cold, waiting for buyers who aren't coming. This wasn't supposed to happen. For years, Canadians were told the electric vehicle was the obvious next step. Cleaner, cheaper to run, the way everything was heading. Governments backed it. Manufacturers bet enormous amounts of money on it. Production ramped up to meet the wave of demand that was certain to arrive. And then, in 2026, the wave stalled. Now, before anyone clicks away, this is not a video about whether electric cars are good or bad. That argument is exhausting, and you've heard it 100 times. This is a video about something more interesting. Why a product that so many people genuinely wanted has stopped selling in Canada. Because the reason is shocking, and it has very little to do with the technology, and almost everything to do with the financial state of the average Canadian household. Stick with me, because this story explains a lot more than electric cars. Let's start with what's out there. Across Canada, dealers report the same pattern: electric vehicles arriving faster than they leave. Inventory that used to turn over in weeks now sits for months. Overflow lots filling with unsold stock. And remember what we covered in the dealership video. Every one of those cars is usually financed, with interest accruing every single day it sits. A field of unsold EVs isn't a quiet inventory problem. It's a meter running, loudly, on a very expensive product. You can see it in the incentives too. Discounts, subsidized financing, sweeteners that would have been unthinkable when demand was hot. When a manufacturer starts throwing money at a car to move it, that tells you everything about which way the pressure is flowing. And the strangest part? Surveys consistently suggest a lot of Canadians are still interested in electric vehicles. They're curious. They like the idea. The interest didn't die. So we have interested buyers and unsold cars sitting in the same country at the same time. Something is standing between the two. Let's find out what. The first barrier is the simplest: price. Electric vehicles in Canada generally cost more upfront than their gasoline equivalents. Not always, and the gap has narrowed on some models, but broadly, the sticker is higher. And the industry's answer to that has always been the same reassuring line. Yes, it costs more today, but you'll make it back in fuel and maintenance savings over the years you own it. That argument works beautifully on paper, and it collapses completely in a household that's out of money. Because here's the thing about a stretched Canadian family in 2026. They don't have a savings over 8 years problem. They have a this month problem. Rent is due now. Groceries are due now. The mortgage renewal is coming now. When you're managing month to month, a higher payment today is a hard no. No matter how good the maths look stretched across a decade, you can't afford to reach. That's the first wall. It's not that Canadians don't understand the long-term savings. It's that long-term savings are a luxury of people who can survive the short term. The second reason multiplies the first, and it's the one people underestimate. A higher-priced car financed at a higher interest rate isn't slightly worse. It's dramatically worse. Interest is charged on the whole amount, so the more expensive the vehicle, the more punishing every point of interest becomes. The premium you're paying for an electric car doesn't just sit there. It compounds against you every month of the loan. So a buyer walks into a showroom genuinely wanting an EV, sits down at the finance desk, and watches the monthly payment come out far higher than they expected. And they do what buyers across this country are doing every single day now. They walk away. Not because they rejected the technology, because they got rejected by the arithmetic. The third reason is uniquely, brutally ours. Canada is cold. Cold weather reduces the driving range of an electric vehicle. That's simply physics. Batteries are less efficient in the cold, and heating the cabin draws significant power. Every EV owner in this country knows the winter range is not the summer range. Now, for a lot of Canadians, this is genuinely a non-issue. If you live in a city, drive moderate distances, and charge at home overnight, winter range is an inconvenience, not a crisis. But Canada is enormous. Distances between towns are long. Weather is severe. And for a huge portion of this country, the question isn't theoretical. It's what happens if I'm on a highway in February, the range is down, and the next charger is far away, and I don't know if it's working. That's not irrational anxiety. That's a reasonable person accounting for a real risk in a real climate. Which brings us to the piece that turns that concern into a deal breaker. The fourth reason is infrastructure, and it's where the promise got ahead of the reality. If you own a home with a driveway or a garage, charging is easy. You plug in overnight and wake up full. For those Canadians, the EV experience is genuinely excellent. But look at who's actually buying cars in Canada right now. Enormous numbers of people live in apartments and condos, or park on the street, or rent a place with no charger and no ability to install one. For them, just charge at home isn't advice. It's a door that's closed. They're dependent on public charging, which means relying on chargers being nearby, available, working, and not occupied when they need them. And here's the cruel overlap with everything else on this channel. The Canadians most locked out of home charging are the same Canadians locked out of home ownership. The housing crisis and the EV transition are quietly connected. If you can't afford a home with a driveway, the affordable-to-run car becomes far less practical for you. The people who would benefit most from cheap fuel are the people least able to access it. But here's the real reason EVs are piling up, and it's the one that genuinely spooked the market. Buyers became afraid of what the car would be worth later. Used electric vehicle values in many markets fell hard and fast, and once that becomes common knowledge, it changes buyer psychology completely. Because most people don't buy a car planning to keep it forever. They buy it knowing they'll sell or trade it eventually, and the value it holds is a huge part of whether the purchase makes sense. Now stack the fears a nervous buyer is carrying. The car costs more up front, it'll cost more to finance, and it might lose value faster than the alternative. And underneath all of it sits the question that really stops people cold. What happens when the battery ages? Because the battery is the single most expensive component in the vehicle, and a replacement can approach or exceed the value of an older car. Most buyers can't confidently answer what that means for a used EV years down the line. So the buyer isn't rejecting electric cars, they're refusing to absorb uncertainty. Pay more now, finance more, and accept an unknown resale value on a technology whose long-term ownership costs aren't yet fully understood. That's a lot of risk to ask a family to carry when they're already stretched thin. And that's the shock. The EV slowdown in Canada isn't a referendum on the technology. It's a referendum on risk tolerance, and Canadian households have run out of any appetite for it. When people are financially secure, they can absorb uncertainty. When they're squeezed, they cling to the known quantity. That's what's really parked in those fields. Let me make it real. Picture a family in a Canadian suburb who genuinely wanted one. They'd read about it for months. They liked the idea of never visiting a gas station. They ran rough numbers on fuel savings and got excited. Then they sat down and worked it through properly. The price was higher than the gas equivalent. The financing pushed the monthly payment past what their budget could carry. They live in a rented townhouse with no charger and no way to install one, so they'd be relying on public charging in a Canadian winter. And when they searched what a used one sells for a few years on, the number worried them. So they bought a used gas car instead. Not because they were talked out of anything, because every single piece of risk in that decision landed on them, and they had no room left to carry it. That family is the whole story. They weren't hostile to the technology. They were financially exhausted, and a financially exhausted household will always choose the option it understands. And this is where it gets bigger than cars. The entire electric transition was built on an assumption that ordinary people would buy these vehicles in large numbers. Factories were built on that assumption. Supply chains, targets, and timelines were built on it. When the buyers don't arrive, that plan doesn't just slow down. It starts costing enormous amounts of money, and the pressure lands on manufacturers, on workers, and eventually on public policy. There's a broader lesson buried in the unsold rows. You cannot run a national transition of any kind on the backs of consumers who are financially underwater. Every plan that depends on ordinary people making a more expensive choice for a long-term benefit runs straight into the same wall. Households with no margin cannot make long-term choices. They can only make survivable ones. That's the real Canadian story here. Not batteries, not chargers. A country whose citizens no longer have the financial breathing room to choose anything but the cheapest option in front of them today. So where does this go? Prices will likely come down. That's what happens when inventory piles up and manufacturers get desperate. Charging networks will keep expanding. Battery technology and warranties will keep improving. And as more used EVs age visibly without disaster, the resale fear will settle. None of this means electric cars are finished in Canada. But the deeper problem doesn't get solved by any of that. As long as Canadian households are stretched to the breaking point, they will keep choosing whatever costs least this month. The transition doesn't just need better cars or more chargers. It needs Canadians who can afford to think past next month's bills. And right now, a great many can't. Which leaves the question this channel keeps arriving at from every direction. What happens to a country's future plans when its people can no longer afford to participate in them? Now I want to hear from you, and I want the honest version. Do you own an electric vehicle in Canada? And how has it actually been through the winters? Did you consider one and walk away? And what stopped you? And do you think this is a temporary stall or a genuine reset? Tell me in the comments below. Keep it civil. This is a topic people have strong feelings about, and I'd rather have a real conversation than a shouting match. I read them all. And if you want honest, clear-eyed breakdowns of what's really happening across Canada, subscribe to Canada Insider. There's a lot more of this story to tell.